Good evening, you're watching Estuary TV News. Coming up, nous sommes tous Charlie. We sense the local reaction to newsagents selling the first edition of Charlie Hebdo since the Paris murders. Dan Kemp will be here with all the sports news, and I'll be reviewing the week's papers with Austin Mitchell, MP, television star and now author. Welcome to Estuary TV News. I'm Hugh Riches. First of all, it's over to James Dunn for the news headlines.
Hello, in the headlines today, stimulation to build on brownfield sites and the reality TV star signing for a non-league football club. But first, people in Scunthorpe hoping to show solidarity with those who lost their lives in terror attacks in Paris were sorely disappointed. Charlie Hebdo magazine published its first magazine since 12 of its staff were killed by fundamentalists earlier this month. A shop owner in Scunthorpe was promised 85 copies of the magazine, which have been sold for over £1,000 online. But people from all over the region who arrived to buy one were sadly disappointed. Just 140 copies were allocated for the whole northern region, and Matthew Stevenson wasn't given any.
I was so excited, I was so happy I was going to get the magazine. I was telling them, so they put that out live. And then I went to collect the magazine with a reporter from the BBC. He came with me, and the information I was told was that the whole of Northern England practically had been given 140 magazines by the distributors, Menzies, and they had no copies for me.
A&E departments in local trusts continue to underperform according to figures released today. The percentage of patients seen within the 4-hour target in northern Lincolnshire has risen to 85% in the week ending January the 11th, nearly 5% more than the previous week. In Hull it's risen from 64 to 73, but both trusts remain drastically below the 95% target and the national average of around 89%. Reality TV star Jake Quickenden is likely to sign for Northern Conference football team Gainsborough Trinity. The Scunthorpe lad's now a huge star after spells on X Factor and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, but he's no stranger to the pitch either, having been a Scunthorpe United youth and played for the Bottisford Town adult team. Gainsborough Trinity are in talks with his agent, but the chairman says he's almost certain Jake will play a game for the club.
I put it out on social media and Jake then retweeted it and favoured it to his 457,000 followers. And my phone just didn't stop for the next 3 hours. It just went absolutely crazy. As it has done through the night, there's been a lot of talk in Gainsborough about it. At the end of the day, a lot of people have said, who's Gainsborough? Well, now they know who Gainsborough are, and that's what it's all about,
That's all from me. Bye for now.
Austin Mitchell started his career as an academic historian in Oxford and New Zealand and became one of the founding reporters and presenters for Yorkshire TV's calendar programme in the 1970s before being elected to Parliament for Great Grimsby. Now he's published a memoir of his days as a broadcaster, Calendar Boy. Austin, welcome. Thank you very much for this book.
Just look at the contrast between this happy person there and this miserable-looking, dark-suited MP.
The years have been kind, Austin. There's absolutely no doubt. I'm sorry we can't offer you a pint to hold in your hand. It's a wonderful book. I enjoyed it so much.
Oh, that's quite nice.
Part of it is absolutely terrifying for anybody who's ever even picked up a camera, because the early days of Calendar, when you first joined, were
exciting times.
Very difficult, though, weren't they?
No, they were very exciting times. I mean, there's nothing. It was actually the 60s, not the 70s. But there's nothing more exciting than founding a new TV station with a new programme in a new area. And what we were doing was decentralising. We were bringing the media from London, which has always been the centre of the media, to Yorkshire and producing programmes about Yorkshire for Yorkshire people. And I rate that as a good achievement. But it was a happy time because there was a new team coming together. And frankly, in those days, ITV used to have money. You remember the licence to print money. And we could do what we wanted, and however expensive, we could do things. And programmes were much more an entertainment and populist than they are now, because television now is very serious. The regional magazines, Look North and Calendar, they're both whole-faced presenters sitting there straight-faced, reading news bulletins. We had 12 people in the studio, we had groups, We had girls in various stages of undress. We had music. We had dancers. We had art. It was everything, much more comprehensive than now. So it was exciting, innovative, and I think the best years of my life.
Well, it was incredibly expensive to make there, wasn't it? Money was no object, as you say, although I know you had your offices in an old trouser factory across the road.
Yorkshire Television made money, there's no doubt, because he had a regional monopoly, you see. And the programme was, because it takes money to make good television, the programme actually got into the top 10. I mean, the national top 10, not just the local. We had 2.5 million viewers on many nights. And I was interested when I went to the BBC for a year to appear on 24 Hours and then later midweek. The audience I got on the BBC, which was around 1 million, was under half the audience, and this was a national audience, under half the audience I got in Yorkshire.
Regional television beating the national levels. But Callendar for so long was part of the heart of Yorkshire. It was a reflection of Yorkshire itself. It was the soul of Yorkshire in some ways. One of the things that comes out of the book so much is you really love Yorkshire. And you call it the God's own county, and the broad acres is the great phrase. That
I love Yorkshire. I'm a Yorkshireman.
It's a love affair with Yorkshire.
We also covered and loved Lincolnshire. Don't forget, I mean, the number of times I've taken films to Skegness and Mablethorpe and all the interesting things in Lincoln itself. We covered all the elections in Lincoln, for instance. So we did a coverage of the whole area, but it was primarily Yorkshire. And most of the programmes, like Emmerdale, for instance, were about Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Dales, and the Barricott, Hannah Hawkswell, and Too Long a Winter. So we did the purpose of regional television, which is to put the whole region onto the national screens.
And you did have some fantastic stories. Not only just sort of news event stories that happened, but some stories that were just a wonderful reflection of the time and the place you were in. You tell a story in here of a little girl reciting a poem in Yorkshire dialect,
Yes.
Which is very moving. It's a very moving story. Just remind me what happened there.
Well, that was interesting because I was trying to do a comic class on teaching the kids to speak Yorkshire, because my generation spoke broad Yorkshire, you know, our barn had a picture of a losing. I could do it, and we used it naturally. But the generation then had stopped using dialect words and stopped speaking. But so we went along to a Leeds primary school and filmed me teaching the class Yorkshire as a foreign language kind of thing. And I was amazed because there was one little girl, part Pakistani, her mother was Yorkshire and her father was Pakistani, and she could recite the poems of John Hartley, who was the great dialect poet of the late 19th century, you know, about two kids finding an apple core in the street, and one said to the other, "It's no, but bite bigger, Billy, have your half," you know. And I thought that was a very moving occasion. That's what we could do.
It is.
We could discover what was going on and put it on the screen. And the problem with this country is it's still far too centralised in London. I mean, now it's got more centralised because Yorkshire Television is now part of ITV. It's no longer an independent company. The BBC has been cutting down on its regional offerings as well. So there's more coming from London and less from Yorkshire. That's a step backwards.
Is the reason simply that Callendar nowadays is, to use your phrase, is rather po-faced? Rather worry if that's a sin that I commit as well, but that it's rather po-faced and pious and serious as compared to just the sheer joy and energy and exuberance of Callendar in your days. Is it just they don't have the money anymore?
Yes, well, money is the root of good television. There's no doubt. But we were left to do what we wanted to do, and that was populist television, Yorkshire speaking Yorkshire to Yorkshire. I think that's what it's all about. There's no point in television unless you're enjoying yourself.
Austin, where can people get this book? Presumably it's available on Amazon and...
it's available locally in the shops.
All good bookshops in the shops.
Yes.
Austin,
all good bookshops.
All good, and some of the bad ones. Austin, we must stop there for a moment.
I'm just hoping, by the way, before we stop,
yes,
there's sufficient photographs of women in the state of half-dress there. I can get the feminist movement to protest against it as a sexist book, and that will increase the sales.
Best possible publicity. Austin, back with you in a moment for the newspapers. You're watching Estuary TV. A little later, we look at another mayoral diary, and Dan Kemp will bring us, as ever, up to date with all the sports news. Charlie Hebdo, the French satirical magazine at the centre of global media attention since the Paris attacks, is set to go on sale in the UK today. But potential buyers have been left disappointed because too few copies are available. Dave Nunn was in Scunthorpe when the magazine went on sale this morning.
They came in numbers to own a little piece of history. Unfortunately, they'll have to wait a bit longer after promised copies of Charlie Hebdo weren't available to be picked up.
Then I went to collect the magazine with a reporter from the BBC. He came with me, and the information I was told was that the whole of Northern England practically had been given 140 magazines by the distributors, Menzies, and they had no copies for me. They had no more information to tell me. So gutting and disappointed.
People still pre-ordered the magazine. All the initial shipment was accounted for within the hour. The response of the customers, with some shaking Matthew's hand and congratulating him, was an upside to today's events.
To find people's understanding that it wasn't my fault. It's really nice to know that I've got, in a way, they're behind me, and believe me, you know, because somebody could make up a story. It could easily be perceived as being a joke. Wasn't a joke, wasn't a con. When I went to pick up the magazines, I had a reporter from the BBC with me, so the truth is there.
Sometime next week, the copies of Charlie Hebdo are expected to arrive at the shop and people will finally get their pieces of history.
And that story about Charlie Hebdo is still filling the newspapers and filling the media. Austin, the Scunthorpe Telegraph reporting it yesterday that there's only going to be 100 copies in this part of England available of Charlie Hebdo. What do you think of the coverage since the murders in Paris last week of this issue?
Well, I thought the coverage was brilliant. I watched it on television. But the coverage of the edition, the recovery and the original edition of Charlie was bad. I mean, I think British media were very reluctant to show the pictures that had caused the problem in the first place. And I think that's cowardice. We have a right to see those pictures. And I think you can't understand the attacks and the violence unless you understand what it's all about. And you can't do that without seeing the pictures. So I was disappointed. I tried to get a copy of Charlie in London. I couldn't get one, so I'm glad to hear it's available in Scunthorpe.
There was some of the broadcast media was covering it. There was a sort of we'll have a quick look at the new front page and then turn it away.
And you never saw it.
And you never saw it. And it was almost as if they were saying we have a right to freedom of expression, but we're not going to use it.
Well, we have. I don't like the way they're rushing to offend religion and to attack Mohammed in particular. I think that's just silly because there are far more potent targets that should be attacked: wealth and politicians and leaders, irresponsible leaders. But I think this is a peculiarly French thing rather than English thing. I think we are fairly respectful. But my first memory of the Canard Enchaîné, the Duck in Chains, which is a famous French satirical magazine, which sells 100,000 copies a week.
And much more famous than Charlie Hebdo until last week. Yeah,
it's the 50s. The Pope was going to the Holy Land for the first time on an official papal visit. And the Canard Enchaîné came out with a huge headline, "Body found, cancelled trip." So it's that peculiarly French humour.
But there's always a great... I mean, Private Eye this last Christmas was full of cartoons which Christians, terribly serious Christians anyway, would have found terribly offensive. Sure, most of them found it was very funny. Is it peculiarly Islam that's sensitive, or particular types of Islam that are sensitive to mockery and just can't take it?
Yeah, well, Private Eye is good on revealing what's going on in the city and what's going on in business. I think we haven't got the same aggressive cartooning in this country. We used to have, at the end of the 18th or the early 19th century, Gilray was savage against British politicians.
Absolutely
I mean,
horrible.
Charles James Fox, who was my hero, was portrayed as a a kind of rattled, boil-infested drunk.
And the king always...
Which he was in part, but, you know...
The king always had his trousers off in Gilray translations, didn't he?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this next story, which comes up in the Hull Daily Mail, and it's also come up in various other papers, which is the closure of Tesco's supermarkets.
Well, that's not Tesco, that's Morrison's.
Morrison's supermarkets.
Morrison's in Bransholme.
Tesco's closing in Immingham as well. That's covered in the Immingham press.
It's closing before it's opened.
And Tesco's closing here in the Driffield Times and Post as well. We're going to be losing a few jobs because of a shrinking in the retail sector.
We are. I think this is a particular blow in Immingham, where the centre hasn't even opened and people will have to travel to Grimsby. I mean, Immingham needs that kind of shop. And my hope would be that somebody else takes over the premises, because while the Tesco and Morrison's have problems and are shrinking a bit, just a bit, Aldi and Lidl are taking people on.
We'll come back to that after this break, Austin. Thank you. Now, in one of our regular features, Unchain My Heart, it's Where's the Mayor? This week, Mayor John Dennis of Heddon.
Luckily, I have to say, after a very busy time running up to Christmas, it is fairly quiet right now, so I've got time to sort of sit back and think of the things that have been happening. Since I became the mayor in May, there have been many of the standard civic functions for the Heddon Town Council, and also attending other civic functions in locations such as Brigg, Goole, Bridlington, Beverley, Hull, etc. The Mayoress and I went to the Guildhall for the Lord Mayor's dinner. We went to the Bridlington Spa for the Chairman's annual bash. We're going shortly to the Humberside and South Yorkshire Cadet Force Regimental dinner in Driffield. And we're looking forward to many more of those to come, including hosting our own, of course. The Heddon Civic Diary is quite a busy one.
I'm still with Austin Mitchell for a final look at the papers. Austin, a moment ago we were just talking about the closure of these supermarkets. In the Grimsby Telegraph, they're reporting that the Aldi in Immingham is in fact expanding and employing 15 more people.
Well, shoppers are moving down market. They're going to cheaper somewhere. I mean, I think the problem is that everybody is now strapped for cash. We've borrowed excessively for Christmas. People are beginning to cut back and spend less, and they're therefore going down market in supermarkets. And this isn't an area where you've got top-of-the-range supermarkets like Waitrose. I sat next to the chief executive of Waitrose some time ago and said, why don't you come to Grimsby? We need a Waitrose in Grimsby. And he said, frankly, you know, it's not a rich enough area. Now, that's terrible. But we are a comparatively poor area, therefore Aldi and Lidl will flourish.
Well, I'm a Grimberian. I have no objection to what I can buy off the market in Freeman Street. Fresh goods, beautiful produce there. Move on to this story, which is this is a Grimsby story, your constituency here. The council's urged to delay plan to scrap brown bin collections. Now, the brown bins are the...
gardening.
The gardening, yeah, the sort of environmental waste, earth and leaves and wood and things like that. Is that not something that we've already paid for in our council tax, or should we be paying extra?
I would have thought
if we want that
so,
service?
but I can see that the council is going to have to cut back on services because the government grant that supports them has been cut back so heavily. I mean, I think this is a plan which, as the Conservative councillor there, Jackson, says, should be postponed to see if we can manage it. But I think it's better to cut back on the brown bins than on the general rubbish collection, because that will be attracting rats and stinking all over the place if collections are cut down.
Garden waste team, as it were, yeah.
On this edition, by the way, it's odd to see the chief executive saying we're going to have more community involvement, but at the same time, we're thinking of putting the council, the parking charges up by £500,000. That's going to raise money from all the people parking over the place, including me.
One more point on the garden waste, the environmental collection. One of the great pleasures of being a Grimberian is the town tip, where you can take garden waste and it's disposed of.
It's a social event.
And it is a social event. And the decoration in that, it's the cleanest and most beautiful tip in England, I would suggest.
You reckon?
Well, yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Well, I was part of the Environment Committee. We visited tips in Denmark, and believe me, they're better than tips in this country.
Are you saying Danish tips
people
are better
drive
than
in,
ours?
park the cars, there's a coffee stand, There's a book stand where you put books and you can take out books if you want to read them. I brought a lot of Danish books home from Denmark, and there's an electronic tip where you can get computers, which many of them working. You put it in yours and chuck it out, bring home another one. They are much more social events. The Danes love their tips.
I hate them. We'll take some Danish advice. Very quick one. Beverley's getting trains directly to London. Why can't the South Bank?
Appalls me. That's whole trains. And we're trying desperately to get a direct service to London from Cleethorpes and Grimsby. But the government isn't having any intruders.
We'll have to.
The East Coast Main Line won't send a spur to Grimsby. They'll send it to Lincoln.
We'll have to stop there, Austin.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Here's the sport, as ever, with Dan Kemp.
We'll start with the weekend's football fixtures. Hull City are at West Ham United on Sunday. The Tigers are without strikers Nikita Jelavic and Abel Hernandez, leaving Yannick Sagbo as the squad's only recognised centre-forward. Scunthorpe United host high-flying Bristol City in League One tomorrow, whilst Grimsby Town are at Blundell Park against conference leaders Barnet. We'll hear from both Mark Robbins and Paul Hurst shortly. And North Ferriby United are at Stalybridge Celtic. They welcome new signing Curtis Bateson into the squad, who's recently been released by the Iron. Now, Scunthorpe boss Mark Robbins thinks their team will have to play like the away side against Bristol, despite having home advantage, but has been left under no illusions that they're looking for 3 points.
You know, I think in all honesty, they've got some good attacking players, they've got some attacking threats, and the way that they play at a 3-5-2 is, and they play it pretty well. You know, they've got good players for those positions, and it suits them.
Another manager facing a tough task this weekend is Mariners boss Paul Hurst. He's aware of the threat posed by the conference's leading marksman John Akinde, but believes there are weaknesses to exploit in Barnett's game.
They're pretty solid throughout. There are one or two sort of things that I've noticed in the play that I'd like to think we might be able to exploit. I'm not going to obviously reveal those, but we've done a little bit of work on that.
Now, Hull City manager Steve Bruce has said the club will not be signing Blackburn Rovers striker Rudy Justed in January. The Benin international has been linked with a supposed £4 million move to the KC, but it appears to be wide of the mark. Meanwhile, in ice hockey, the Hull Stingrays have an Elite League doubleheader against Fife. The Rays travel to Scotland on Saturday before the return match at the Hull Arena on Sunday with a 6 p.m. face-off. In Rugby League, the KC Stadium hosts the first Rugby League derby of the season. And that's all for the sport.
Thanks, Dan. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid, today. Thanks to Austin Mitchell. If you have a story for us, the details are in the corner of the screen. Until next week, good evening.
Hello and welcome to Estuary TV's weather. Another cold Saturday with sunshine and scattered wintry showers, some heavy with a risk of hail. Further snow accumulations likely over hills with a maximum temperature of 3 degrees. Remaining cold with further wintry showers and sunny periods on Sunday. Widespread overnight frosts with perhaps freezing fog patches.